Sylvester Stallone stood in the middle of a soundstage on the Paramount lot in Burbank, in front of 63 crew members, a director who had not moved in 40 seconds, and a man in a plain gray t-shirt who had not yet said a word, and told him that he did not belong in this industry, not as a joke, not as a warm-up, as a statement of fact. "You have been coasting," Stallone said, "your whole career. You know it. I know it. Everyone in this room knows it." He said it the way someone says a thing they have been holding for a long time. Not with heat, with the specific weight of a man who believes he is doing someone a favor by finally telling the truth. The man in the gray t-shirt looked at him. Dark jeans, worn boots. No expression that required interpretation. He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that does not fill rooms. It empties them. Then he said something so unexpected that the director, a woman named Sandra Voss, who had been making films for 22 years, later said she had written it down that night because she did not trust herself to remember it accurately. Nobody moved for 10 minutes after he said it. Not Stallone, not the director, not the 63 people who had been doing their jobs one moment and it stopped, all at once, without any signal to do so. What happened in the weeks that followed, what Sylvester Stallone did privately, and what he said publicly, and what it cost him, began in that silence. There is a soundstage on the Paramount lot called Stage 19. It is one of the oldest working stages on the lot, built in 1938, and it has the particular quality that old working spaces acquire when they have been used continuously for a very long time. A density of absorbed purpose. The sense that the walls have been present for more things than they can account for. The ceiling is 60 feet at its peak. The floor is original concrete, painted a flat gray that has been repainted 16 times. When the heavy doors seal for a take, the silence inside is complete, in a way that smaller stages do not achieve. The production was a thriller called The Meridian Line, a $140 million studio picture with a shoot scheduled across 9 weeks in Los Angeles and 4 days in Prague. It had a director, Sandra Voss, who had made 3 previous studio films and whose work on the second of them, a tense, quiet drama about a hostage negotiation that had cost $24 million and made $180 million, had earned her this one. It had a cast of 4 principals and a supporting ensemble of 11. Keanu Reeves was one of the principals. Sylvester Stallone was another. This was, by any measure that mattered to a studio, a significant pairing. Both men had been fixtures in the industry for more than 3 decades. Both had survived the specific attrition of long careers in a business that was not designed for survival. Neither of them required introduction. They had met twice before, briefly, at events where meeting was incidental to the purpose of the evening. They had not worked together. This was the 3rd week of principal photography. Keanu arrived on Stage 19 that morning, the way he arrived every morning, 20 minutes before his call time, in the same dark jeans and worn boots, and a plain gray t-shirt that had seen enough wash cycles that the color had flattened to something between charcoal and ash. He brought his own coffee in a thermos. He knew the names of every crew member by the end of the 1st week. He did not have an entourage. He did not have a chair with his name on the back, or if he had one, no one had ever seen him sit in it. Stallone arrived at 7:45. 2 assistants. A leather jacket over a black compression shirt. He moved through the stage the way a man moves when he is accustomed to every room acknowledging his arrival. And he was not wrong that rooms tended to do this. His face was one of the most recognized faces in the world, and had been for 48 years, and the specific gravity of that kind of recognition was not something that could be turned off at a stage door. he noticed Keanu at the craft table. He looked at him for a moment. Then he poured his coffee and went to review the day's pages with Sandra. It was not until the fourth setup of the morning that the thing happened. Sylvester Stallone was born Frank Sylvester Stallone, Jr. in New York City in 1946, in the same Hell's Kitchen that had been producing men who understood scarcity as a first language for 100 years before him. His father was a hairdresser from Italy who had come to the U.S. with nothing and built a modest life through the specific combination of ambition and stubbornness that immigrants bring to the act of starting over, and who expressed love the way men of that generation often expressed it, through high expectation, through the withholding of approval, through the belief that softness was a luxury that children born without security could not afford. His mother was a different order of person entirely. She was an astrologer and a dancer and a promoter of talent, a woman with a performer's instinct for what an audience needed, and she pushed Sylvester toward expression in the way that people push when they recognize something they wish had been recognized in themselves. He was a difficult child and a more difficult adolescent, and he was expelled from more than one school and spent his 20s in the particular poverty of a person who has decided what he is going to do with his life and has not yet been given permission to do it. The years between 25 and 30 were the ones that mattered. He was broke enough to sell his dog, a dog named Butkus, a bull mastiff he had raised from a puppy, for $25 to a stranger outside a liquor store, because he could not afford to feed him. He sat in a cold apartment in New York and wrote a screenplay in 3.5 days. He sold it for $35,000 and refused to sell it without the right to play the lead. The studio offered him $360,000 for the screenplay without the starring role. He said no. The film was Rocky. It was made for $1 million, and earned $225 million. It won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and transformed Sylvester Stallone from a man who had sold his dog to a man whose face appeared on the cover of Time magazine in the same week. He had bought Butkus back for $15,000, 3 months after the original sale, from the stranger outside the liquor store who, when he saw who was buying him back, charged accordingly. This was the story Stallone told when people asked him what it had cost to get where he was. He told it in interviews. He told it on stages. He had told it so many times that it had become, over 48 years, a story about himself, told by a man who had partially ceased to be the person the story was about. The man who had sat in a cold apartment and written Rocky in 3.5 days had been hungry in a specific way. The man who arrived at stage 19 with 2 assistants and a leather jacket was no longer hungry in that way. He was hungry in a different way. The way that people who have been recognized are hungry to have been recognized for the right reasons, which is harder to satisfy than the original hunger, because it has no clear point of completion. He had watched Keanu Reeves' career for 30 years with the specific attention of a man who recognized talent and could not entirely account for a particular quality in it. The talent was evident. The craft was demonstrable. What Stallone could not account for was the ease. Keanu moved through his work the way someone moves through a room they know well, without hesitation, without visible effort, without the marks of the struggle that Stallone believed was the price of doing the work correctly. He had decided, over 30 years of watching, that the ease was the problem. That morning during the 4th setup, Sandra called a 15-minute hold for a lighting adjustment. The crew moved equipment. The principals stood at their marks or found chairs. Stallone walked toward Keanu, who was standing near the camera cart reading through the afternoon's pages with a pencil, and said what he had been thinking across 30 years of watching, in the specific way that people say things they have decided to finally say. "You have been coasting," Stallone said. "Your whole career." The secondary character in the room that morning was a young woman named Dana Yee. She was 24 years old, 6 weeks into her first job as a set PA on a studio feature, and she was standing 8 feet to the left of where Stallone had positioned himself, because her job in that moment was to hold a call sheet and be ready to hand it to whoever needed it. And she was doing that job with the focused invisibility that set PAs on their first major production learned to cultivate. She was close enough to hear everything. She had grown up in Monterey Park, the daughter of 2 Taiwanese immigrants who had met in Los Angeles in 1994, and who had worked between them across 3 decades in a restaurant, a dry cleaning business, and a real estate office that specialized in the San Gabriel Valley corridor. She had studied film at UCLA. She had gotten this job by emailing the production coordinator every 3 weeks for 4 months. She had been on set for 6 weeks and had already formed opinions about everyone she worked near. About Sandra, who was precise and generous, and whose directions were always specific enough to be useful. About the gaffer, a man named Warren who was 63 and moved around the rigging with the economy of motion of someone who had been doing it for 40 years. About Keanu, who had on her 3rd day asked her what she was hoping to do eventually, and then listened to the full answer. About Stallone, who was correct in his craft and formidable in his presence, and who, when he moved through the stage, produced a particular shift in the room, a slight contraction in the behavior of everyone near him, a small reduction in the normal ambient looseness of a set, as though people were performing slightly better versions of their jobs in the radius of his attention. She had noticed this. She had filed it without judging it. When Stallone stopped in front of Keanu and said what he said, Dana held the call sheet against her side and did not move. Keanu looked at Stallone for a moment after the words landed, not searching him, not deciding how to respond, just looking, in the direct and patient way he looked at things. The room had gone quiet around them, the way rooms go quiet when 2 things are happening at once. The ordinary business of a set continuing at reduced volume, and something else happening entirely on top of it. Keanu set the pages down on the cart behind him. He said, "Can I ask you something?" Stallone waited. "What is it that you think I'm coasting from?" The question was quiet. No edge to it. Genuinely asked, the way someone asks when they want to know the answer rather than win the exchange. Stallone looked at him. This was not the response he had arranged himself for. He had arranged himself for several other responses. For irritation, for dismissal, for the particular performance of wounded dignity that famous people sometimes produce when challenged. He had not arranged himself for the question. He said, "You make it look easy, everything you do." Keanu said, "I know." A pause. "That's not coasting," Keanu said. "That's 40 years." He said it without emphasis, without pride. The way someone states a thing that is simply true and does not require decoration. The room was completely still. Stallone looked at him. Something moved through his face. Not anger. Not what anyone watching would have called anger. Something more complicated than that. The look of a man who has said a thing he believed and has just been shown the floor he was standing on when he believed it. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He nodded, once, the kind of nod that is not agreement, but acknowledgement, and walked back toward his chair. Nobody said anything, not for 10 minutes. Sandra Voss did not call action. She stood at the monitor and watched the stage and let the 10 minutes be what they were. What Keanu did not do in that moment was what made it last. He did not follow Stallone across the stage. He did not find Sandra to process what had just happened. He did not look at the crew, or at Dana standing 8 feet to his left, in the way that people look when they want confirmation that the room saw what they saw. He picked up the pages from the cart. He made a note in the margin with his pencil. He waited for Sandra to call the set. Sandra called the set 4 minutes later. They worked until 6:15. The day went smoothly in the specific way that days go smoothly after the air has been cleared of something that had been building for 3 weeks without a name. Every setup ran on time. The afternoon pages, a two-hander between Stallone's character and Keanu's, a conversation in a stairwell that was the pivot of the film's second act, were finished in 3 takes. Sandra did not ask for a fourth. It was that clean. At the end of the day, as the crew began breaking down, Stallone stopped at Keanu's position near the camera cart. He said, "Can we talk?" "Tomorrow, before call." Keanu said, "Yes." Sylvester Stallone's trailer was parked at the north end of the lot, away from the main cluster, because he had been working on studio lots long enough to know which spots got morning sun and which got afternoon shadow, and he preferred the afternoon shadow. He was there at 6:45 the next morning, which was 30 minutes before his own call time and 45 minutes before Keanu's. He had not slept well. This was not unusual. He had not slept easily since his early 40s. Since the specific shift in metabolism that comes to people who have been running at high intensity for decades and cannot, even when the work slows, lower the internal engine to a speed that permits rest. He had thought about Rocky, which he did sometimes in the hours before sleep arrived. Not the film, the writing of it. The cold apartment. The 3.5 days. The particular quality of desperation that produces clarity, which is not something you can manufacture in its absence. He had thought about what Keanu had said. That's not coasting. That's 40 years. He had been wrong, and he knew he had been wrong, and knowing it was not the same as knowing what to do with it. He had spent 48 years building a self-concept around effort being visible, around the idea that the work showed on your face and your body and in the roughness of the thing you produced, that polish was the enemy of truth. He had made films about men for whom everything cost something. The costing was the point. The costing was what made them real, and here was a man whose work did not show the costing, and who had not been coasting, who had simply learned over 40 years to carry the weight without it changing his posture. Stallone had the specific discomfort of a man whose organizing principle has just been made optional. Keanu arrived at 6:50. Dark jeans, the same worn boots, a different gray t-shirt that was nearly identical to the one the day before. He knocked on the trailer door. Stallone opened it. "Come in," he said. Keanu came in and sat in the chair across the small table and waited. Stallone sat. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. "I was wrong yesterday," he said. "What I said. It was wrong, and I said it in front of 60 people, and I want to tell you that." Keanu was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "Thank you." Stallone looked at him. "That's it? What else would there be?" Stallone was quiet. Then he said, almost involuntarily, "I sold my dog once. To pay for food. To pay for the ability to keep writing." He paused. "I have been telling that story for 48 years. I tell it because it is the proof. That I earned it." Another pause. "I have been looking at you for 30 years and not seeing the proof, and I think I decided that meant there wasn't any." Keanu looked at him carefully. "What did you lose?" he said. "Not publicly. What did you lose that nobody knows about?" Stallone was quiet for a long time. He said one thing, quietly. A name. A person he had lost years ago. In a year when everything had been going wrong in a way he had not spoken about publicly and never fully would. He said the name, and then he was quiet, again. Keanu nodded. He did not fill the quiet with anything. After a moment, Keanu said, "That is the proof. That is the only proof there ever is." He paused. "Nobody can see it from the outside. That's the thing. You can see mine, and I can see yours, and the room can't see either one. But it's there." He stood up. "See you on set," he said. He left. Stallone sat in the trailer for another 20 minutes before his assistant knocked. The film wrapped 9 weeks later, 3 days under schedule. On the last day of principal photography, Sandra Voss called wrap at 4:15 in the afternoon, and the crew applauded in the way film crews applaud at the end of a production, with genuine feeling and an audible relief at the particular shared ordeal of it being finished. Stallone stood at the edge of the stage and watched the room. He was quiet in a way his assistant had not seen before at a wrap. Usually, he moved quickly. Handshakes and goodbyes and the specific efficiency of someone who has an early flight. He stood and watched. Dana Yee, standing near the camera cart where she had spent most of the production, was crying in the way that people cry at the end of their first significant job, not with sadness, but with the overflow of something that has been held under pressure for 9 weeks and has nowhere else to go. Stallone walked over to her. She did not notice him until he was beside her, because she was looking at the stage, at the lights coming down. He said, "What are you hoping to do eventually?" She looked at him. "Direct," she said. The word came out without the hesitation she usually applied to it. Stallone nodded once. "Good." He looked at the stage. "Do it before you think you're ready. Waiting doesn't help." He walked to his car. Dana stood there for a moment. Then she wrote it in her phone, exactly as he had said it, because she did not trust herself to remember it accurately. The months after the film wrapped were not simple for Stallone. They were not publicly difficult. From the outside, the period looked unremarkable. A man between productions, in post on one film, in development on another, doing the ordinary maintenance of a 48-year career. He gave 2 interviews. He attended a premiere. He was photographed in Malibu and in New York, and appeared in both sets of photographs, as he always appeared, composed, large. The face familiar to the point of abstraction. Inside it was harder. He had said something on a soundstage in Burbank that he had believed for 30 years, and it had been wrong, and the wrongness was not a small thing to absorb because the belief had been structural. It had been the organizing principle beneath the principle, the thing underneath the story about Rocky, underneath the dog, underneath all of it. The idea that the cost of doing the work had to be visible, that ease was the enemy of depth, that what you could not see in someone was what was not there. He had been wrong about that, not entirely. There were people for whom it was true. But as an absolute, as a lens through which to evaluate everyone who did not show the scars the way he showed the scars, he had been wrong, and he had applied that lens to a man in a gray t-shirt for 30 years and said what he said in front of 60 people on a stage 19 morning, and the man had corrected him in 11 words and picked up his pages. He thought about the trailer conversation, the name Keanu had asked him for, the person he had lost, the year that nobody had full knowledge of, the thing he had never put into an interview, because some things do not become stories no matter how long you carry them. That is the proof. That is the only proof there ever is. He thought about this for several months. Then, he did something that surprised his publicist, his manager, and his assistant equally, all 3 of whom learned about it independently when the announcement went out. He established a grant, not a foundation, not a high-profile philanthropic initiative with a gala and a board and a celebrity-studded launch event. A grant, administered quietly through a production nonprofit that had been operating in Los Angeles for 11 years and that funded entry-level positions, PAs, production assistants, development coordinators, or people from underrepresented communities who could not afford to work for free in an industry that depended on people working for free. The grant was called the First Year Fund. It covered 6 positions per year, each for 12 months, at a living wage in working productions. No application essay. No requirement to explain yourself. Evidence of commitment and an interview with a working professional. That was all. Stallone did not attend the announcement. He did not give a quote for the press release. His name was on it, because the grant required a donor name, but there was no speech and no photograph and no moment designed for the fact of the giving. His publicist called him afterward and asked if he wanted to do more with it. A feature, a profile, something that would extend the reach of the announcement. He said, "No." She said, "It could do a lot of good." "It already is doing good," he said. "That's enough." She had worked for him for 11 years, and she recognized this as a different answer than he would have given 11 years before. She wrote a note to herself and moved on. Stallone gave one interview 4 months after the film wrapped. Not about the film. It was still in post-production, the effects work still running behind. About the industry. About what 4 decades had taught him. The interviewer was a journalist who had been covering Hollywood since before Stallone's second act, and who had interviewed him 3 times before, and understood that the register he worked in required patience rather than pressure. Near the end, the interviewer asked him what he believed separated the people who lasted from the people who didn't. Stallone was quiet for a moment. He said, "I used to think it was visible effort, that you could see the work on a person, that the roughness of it was the evidence." He paused. "I still think that's true for some people. But I met someone recently who changed my mind about whether it was the only way." The interviewer asked who. Stallone smiled. The real one, slightly lopsided. The one that people who had known him for a long time recognized as the face underneath the face he was famous for. "Someone who carries a lot and doesn't show it," he said. "That's its own kind of proof. I just couldn't see it for a long time." He did not say the name. He did not need to. Dana Yee worked as a set PA on 3 more productions over the following 2 years. She saved carefully. She applied to the AFI directing workshop for women in the 2nd year. She was accepted on her first application, which was not the way most people were accepted. Her short film, made on a budget of $14,000 across 5 shooting days in Monterey Park, was about a woman in her 60s who had run the same alterations shop on the same block for 31 years, and who, on the day the lease expired, had to decide whether to fight for renewal or finally close. It had 2 speaking parts and almost no score, and ran 18 minutes. It screened at a festival in Austin as part of the Emerging Director Showcase. A producer named Margaret Sue, who had made 3 features over 15 years and who came to Austin every year specifically for the showcase, watched it twice in the same afternoon. She called Dana the following Monday. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. At the end of it, Margaret said, "What do you want to make?" Dana had the answer ready. She had been carrying it for 2 years, since a soundstage on the Paramount lot. Since a morning in the 3rd week of a production, when a man in a plain gray t-shirt had said something so quiet and so exact that the entire room had gone still. And she had stood 8 feet away holding a call sheet and understood, without yet having the words for it, that she was watching what it looked like when a person knew exactly who they were. She told Margaret what she wanted to make. Margaret said, "Let's do it." They were in development for 14 months. Donna's first feature, a $3.8 million film about a Taiwanese-American family in the San Gabriel Valley navigating a business sale and everything the business had meant. Shot for 22 days in Los Angeles and was completed on time and $40,000 under budget, which her line producer, who had worked on 40 productions, said he had seen happen twice before in his career. It premiered at a festival in the spring. The review in a trade publication called it a debut of unusual quiet authority. Donna read the phrase 3 times. She wrote it down, not because it was a good review, though it was, because the word quiet. She thought about stage 19. The 10 minutes. She thought. Yes. Exactly, she was 29 years old. I have thought about the quiet. The 10 minutes. I keep coming back to what was actually in it. 63 people, and a director who did not move, and 2 men who had both spent their entire adult lives in front of rooms full of people, and the room was simply still. Not because anyone was frightened. Not because it was a fight. Because something had been said that was true and exact and did not need anything added to it. Most of us do not say those things. We approach them. We circle them. We find approximate words and approximate gestures, and we communicate something close to the thing. And it works well enough, and the room moves on. What I keep thinking about is what Keanu did not do afterward. He did not turn to the room. He did not absorb its confirmation. He picked up his pages and made a note in the margin with his pencil, and waited for Sandra to call the set. As if the truth had been spoken, and that was sufficient. As if it did not require an audience to be true. I don't know that I have that. I am not sure most people do. The need to be seen seeing something clearly, that is as strong as most other needs I am aware of in myself. And here is a man who apparently does not have it, or who has it, and has learned to leave it alone. I keep thinking about that. This story is fictional, inspired by Sylvester Stallone's and Keanu Reeves's real-world reputations for, respectively, hard-won intensity and quiet, unglamorous self-possession. Drop something in the comments if this landed somewhere. Not a review, just what you're still thinking about 10 minutes after reading it. That is the thing I am curious about. If you know someone who carries a lot without showing it, share this with them. They will know what you mean. There are more stories coming. Subscribe if you want them. See you in the next one.